Amen. You may be seated.
I don't know of anything I like more than singing about the Trinity, this triune God who is the only true God. And sometimes we are singing and we are caught up as though we were caught up into the heavenly realms. And then we have to come back down. And let's face it, where we live is a mess. Where we live meaning planet Earth. It's a mess. I've noticed that when I'm trying to find a common point to talk to unbelievers, I can usually find a common point right there of agreement that our world is a mess. But can I tell you what my greater concern is, more so than looking at the global picture of the world being as a mess? As a pastor, I'm concerned with the number of people who are a mess. That day in and day out, we are dealing in ministry with lives that are really, really messed up. In fact, there could be lives right here on seminary campus that for whatever reason are embroiled in something personal that is just tearing you up right now. You might not know how you're going to make your next car payment. You're glad to hear that your tuition is going to be reduced some next semester, but you're wondering, is it going to be enough? You may be struggling through your marriage. You newlyweds don't have to be married long to learn the reality that not all marriages are made in heaven. And it's hard sometimes. And we run into trouble whatever we do, and let's face it, a lot of that trouble comes to us not because we've done anything wrong. It just finds us. Trouble can find us sometimes because we haven't done anything and just there it is. But we have to be honest that a lot of the trouble we bring on ourselves. A lot of the trouble we face in life comes from what we do. It comes from our sin, doesn't it? It comes from looking at God's holy and perfect and righteous standard and choosing a different way to think and act and be. We know it going in, we understand it, and we do it anyway, and then we reap the repercussions from our sin. And can I tell you, as you go into ministry, so much of what you're going to be dealing with, as you are helping people put lives back together, is that the root of it is just sin. I mean, it goes all the way back just to the basics. We can take adult people back to the troubles that they are facing in life because at some point in life they chose not to honor their parents. We're going to help people deal with problems in their life, and they will come to you and they want a solution, and they will not like hearing sometimes that you have to say, here's the solution, repent. It can be lying. It can be adultery. It can be sort of that catch-all sin of coveting, because why do we lie, commit adultery, disobey our parents? Isn't it because we're coveting something? And we can really make a mess of things, and people can make a mess of things, because the fact is, disobeying Jesus can mean trouble in our lives. We know that disobeying Jesus can mean trouble in our lives, but here's what we might not think about. That's not the only thing that'll get us into trouble. We're in John chapter 6 today, a very short passage, and maybe a very short sermon. We'll see. John chapter 6, beginning in verse 16. Jesus had just fed the 5,000. And it says in verse 16, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. Now let me tell you that Matthew and Mark both give an account of this very same event. They both tell this story. And I don't know if you have experienced this yet or not, but you will have church members, either because they've been watching something on cable TV or because they've been reading their Bibles. And they're going to notice that Matthew and Mark and John do not repeat the exact same words verbatim. Now, if they've been watching the Discovery Channel shows, they have seen some guy with a PhD stuck to the end of his name say, see, this proves that the Bible can't be trusted because these guys don't agree on things. But what happens a lot of times is your people in your ministry setting will come to you, they're reading the Bible, and they'll say, can you explain this? Can you explain why the details are different in these different stories? Did somebody get something wrong? And if they did, does that mean I can't trust Scripture? And we need to be able to respond to that. Here's kind of the way I respond to that with people is I'd say to you, if you're married and you and your wife are in a room with people and one of you begins telling a story, whether husband or wife, one of you's telling a story, and you get like 4 seconds into the story and your spouse starts saying, don't forget to tell them this, and remember that, and oh, you got to tell this, until you eventually look at your spouse and say, would you like to tell the story? The reason is, we're telling the same story. It's not that anybody's lying, but there are different details that grab each of us, and there are different details that we find significant. And what we have is Matthew, Mark, and John telling the same story, but they're telling it differently because they're different people. Matthew says in his account that they were beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. They were in the northeast part of the Sea of Galilee, and you understand the Sea of Galilee 600 feet below sea level, and these winds can funnel right down through that chasm, and I understand that they can come up very rapidly and cause these storms that are actually very deadly. They have the potential to be deadly storms. They've taken people's lives because these storms on the Sea of Galilee are so intense. And so here they are in these hazardous conditions. Verse 19 says, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, and bear in mind, they're rowing against the wind, according to Matthew. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. Now, it's interesting because there are those, and you'll study commentaries and you will read different perspectives. And I've actually read where people have said, well, what really happened is they were very close to the shoreline because at night they would have stayed near the shoreline and they just saw Jesus walking on the shore. Can I suggest to you that's silly? Because who's going to be in a boat near the shoreline and see somebody walking on the shore and be frightened? Oh, there's somebody walking on the shore. What are we going to do now? That doesn't even make sense. A fair reading of the Gospel of John will not allow us to read it that way. But Matthew clears this up for us. He actually says, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land. So in verse 20, John says, but he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Now, this is the point where Matthew also talks about Peter wanting to walk to Jesus. I dig Peter. He just cracks me up. And so Peter sees Jesus walking on the water, and what does he do? Say, hey, I want to do that too, right? Because he's Peter. And so Jesus says, well, come on, because he's Jesus. And come on, Peter. And so Peter gets out there, and he's doing fine walking on the water till he does what? You remember? He takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he puts them on the storm. As soon as he gets his eyes off Jesus, he starts sinking, so Jesus picks him up and puts him in the boat. Verse 21 says, then they were glad to take him in the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Now, again, we've got detractors. Some say, well, when it says immediately the boat was at the land, what this means is you know how it is when you're having a really good time and time flies. And so what this really means is that they were just so happy when Jesus got in the boat, and they were having such a good time. It seemed like just a couple of minutes, and they were back to the shore. You do understand, don't you, that those kinds of explanations always come from people who have a hard time believing the miraculous. And you need to understand that in your very Baptist churches, you go pastor even a rural Baptist church somewhere, you think that everybody in that Baptist church is going to adhere to, believe, understand, know Baptist doctrine. You're mistaken. And you will be confronted in your ministry settings and in your study time with people who actually are skeptics about the miraculous taking place. I want to encourage you not to give in, but I also want to encourage you, don't be ashamed of preaching about the miracles in Scripture. We have to believe all of it. God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. God delivered the people of Israel through a sea Not some soggy marshland, a sea where he walled up the water on the right and he walled up the water on the left, and they crossed on dry ground. God provided water from a rock. God provided manna, and he provided quail. God brought down the city of Jericho without a siege ramp or an arrow being fired. He just brought it down. He defeated massive armies. He rained fire from heaven. And you know what God did? He took a guy named Jonah, stuck him in the belly of a fish, and kept him alive for 3 days. Jesus was born of a virgin. Jesus turned water into wine. Jesus healed sick people. He raised people from the dead. And after he himself was dead, he walked right out of the tomb. It's all true, and to strip the Bible or pretend that the supernatural is not in the Bible is to gut the Bible of its meaning and its significance, leaving us with no hope that Jesus will return again in the clouds, cast Satan into the lake of fire, and gather his own for all eternity. What happened here in this very brief account of John's is that Jesus miraculously walked on top of the water in the middle of a terrible storm and brought the boat to the shore at their destination. Now, I want to go back to where we started. I was saying that disobeying Jesus can get you into trouble, but what you also need to know is this: following Jesus can get you into trouble. Following Jesus can mean trouble in your life. Look, these disciples were in a potentially deadly storm in the middle of the night. And here's what Matthew tells us. Matthew says he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. He made them do it. He made them get in the boat at night and go into treacherous waters. This was Jesus' idea. And this is the testimony of Scripture that following Jesus can mean trouble. I want you to consider what the writer of Hebrews says. In this great roll call of faith we talk about it, he's talking about the heroes of the faith. He's talking about these men and women who we know of because of their great faith. And listen to what he says. He says some of them had great success. What more shall I say? He says, for time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Yes, please, that's the kind of Christianity I want right there. I want the victory after victory after victory. I want it all good. I don't want to do any funerals anymore. I want to walk into the funeral home and raise people from the dead. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. But it's not always like that, is it? Even if you have a lot of faith. Because talking about these people of great faith, the writer of Hebrews goes on and says some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. Can we please tattoo this passage onto the foreheads of all the prosperity non-gospel preachers out there? This should put that heresy to bed. They were destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, listen, did not receive what was promised. These were men and women of great faith. And they never got in this life what they were looking for. Think of the first disciples. There were 12 of them. We know that one of them was a betrayer. But of the 11 left, what happened to all these guys? 10 of them murdered. Why were they murdered? Because they followed Jesus. Following Jesus led to their death. Think about the Apostle Paul. Prison, torture, eventually death. This is the story of Christians through the ages, is it not? This is the story of the church. The story of the church is not a story of prosperity. The story of the church is exactly the opposite. The story of the church is people in storms, in the middle of lakes, in the middle of the night, worrying about their very survival. And it's still the story of the church. This isn't just biblical stuff. This isn't just first century stuff. This is what it means to follow Jesus. Following Jesus can end your life. In the almost 2,000 years of Christian history, 2,000 years of the church, are you aware of what the bloodiest century has been for Christians? It's been the last 100 years. There have been more Christians martyred in the last 100 years globally than in all 1,900 years combined. Voice of the Martyrs and other organizations like that tell us that by the end of 2013, globally, 185,000 Christians will be murdered simply for being Christians. Not only that, we are told that currently at least 2 million Christians globally are being persecuted. And by persecuted, I don't mean somebody looks at them funny or calls them a name or mocks them on TV. We're talking loss of livelihood. We're talking loss of freedom, being imprisoned. We're talking torture. We're talking having children stolen. We're talking horrendous things going on to our brothers and sisters right now. Now, what about us? Does that mean we're going to die? Does that mean you're going to die for your faith? Maybe it does. We're very comfortable right now, aren't we? Who knows what the future holds, but some of you in this room are going to places where you will be at risk. We know that. Dr. Kelly knows that. I can tell you part of the burden of the faculty here is to have you equipped to go to those places where you're not going to have all your seminary friends and your pastor fellowships. You're going to be all alone in very hostile places, and your lives could be in very real danger. And listen, I've caused enough of my own problems because of my own sin, but even though my life has never been at risk, following Jesus has brought on a lot of difficulty for me. A lot of you can relate to this. I mean, we could talk about the financial difficulty all day of following Jesus. I had a very good career going. I mean, a really good career. I was climbing the ladder, so to speak. I was doing really well. We always had plenty of money. We were all the time going out to eat. Everything was great. I drove a really awesome sports car that I looked really good driving. I did. I used to drive by on my way home. This building had mirrors on, the windows that reflect, and I'd check myself out. It was a cool car. And then we went to seminary. And I got a job at Sears. Nothing wrong with working at Sears. But it didn't pay what my former career paid. And it was tough. It was tough. We were going through exactly what a lot of you, maybe most of you in this room are going through right now. I remember one time Terry says to me, I have beans and I have rice. And we're out of money. We are living proof that you can live on beans and rice. It can be done. If you're from New Orleans, you knew that already. One time, she comes out to me. I was working in the front yard. She comes out to me in the front yard, and she said, I have enough food for one more meal. Our youngest son was in diapers. He was wearing his last diaper, and she says, we have $2.38 to our name. I'll never forget that, $2.38. When I tell you there were times we did not know where our next meal was coming from, I'm not exaggerating. That's not hyperbole. We didn't know at times where our next meal was coming from. Why were we poor? Because we followed Jesus. We've had trouble. There's the distance from our family. I was the only member of my family not in the room when my mom died. I was 1,800 miles away. My brother was there. My sister was there. My dad was there. Where's Mike? Not there. The alienation from friends and family. Do you know that I lost friends by following Jesus? Do you know that there are family members whom I have all my life loved deeply and had great relationships with that to this day will have nothing to do with me? And you think that doesn't hurt deeply? Why? Because I followed Jesus. I won't go into detail, but I can tell you that because I have followed Jesus, my family and I have endured at times an onslaught of demonic attack. We don't talk about those things at parties. But it is a reality for you. And you need to be braced for it. That we have an enemy who hates what we do. So does that mean it's always going to be really hard following Jesus? I don't know what it's going to be like for you. And you might be saying, man, glad I came to chapel. I got really encouraged today by Dr. Miller. He was telling me how awful life is going to be for following Jesus. Why stay in seminary? Why go into ministry? Here's why. You're going to have trouble. Every person is going to have trouble. But the difference is Jesus. Everyone has trouble, but not everyone has Jesus in the boat. And here's the thing, whatever following Jesus brings, he's worth it. Why? Tell me why. Tell me why. A man can be given the option of having his family taken away from him and brutalized, or having his family given back to him if he'll just renounce Jesus and he chooses Jesus. Tell me why. Tell me why people right now are rotting in horribly filthy and degrading prisons around the world, when all they could do is renounce their faith and have freedom. Why do they choose that? It's because Jesus is worth it. He's worth everything. He's worth our blood. He's worth our families. He's worth our lives. He's worth it all. Jesus is worth it. Why should you stay the course? Why should you live on beans and rice in seminary? Why should you endure satanic attack? Why should you be willing to go everywhere God calls you, even if it means you'll never see the face of your sweet mother again? Why should you be willing to do all of that? Because Jesus is worth it. Why did they get in that boat in the middle of the night and launch out into those treacherous waters? Because they believed that Jesus is worth it. And I want to say to you, we have to tell the world about this Jesus who is worth it. Isn't it interesting that everywhere it seems like persecution has broken out over the last 2,000 years, this most severely against Christians? The church has exploded. Why is it that we say the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church? It is because when the blood is spilled, the value of Jesus is demonstrated. He's worth it. And that has to be our message. Give them Jesus. I want to give you two cautions. When you are out there in ministry and you are dealing with people one-on-one, or you're dealing with people from the pulpit, don't give them rules. Don't give them a legalism. Don't tell them. The easiest thing to do, somebody comes to you and they tell you, my life is a train wreck, is to say, you need to read your Bible and pray more. You know what you've just done? You've just given them some rules and told them if they'll just read their Bibles and pray more, their life will be better. And the Bible doesn't say that. Do they need to read their Bibles and pray more? Yes. But is that the solution? We don't want to saddle them with a new kind of legalism. And the second thing I would say to you is, don't make promises the gospel does not make. Don't tell non-Christians. Don't even hint or give the impression to non-Christians that if they'll just come to Jesus, life's going to be grand. Give them Jesus. Talk about Jesus. Tell the story of Jesus. Show them that Jesus is the hero of Scripture. Help them to see the glory of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Don't water down the gospel. Don't try to improve on the gospel. Just give them Jesus, because everyone you're talking to is either currently in a storm or a storm is coming down the road. And when they've got nothing left but Jesus, we need to show them why Jesus is all they need. The disciples had no hope in that boat in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, except Jesus. And I want to implore you, in everything you do, whatever you do, give them Jesus. Let's pray. Holy Father, we know that we have brought trouble on ourselves before because of our sin. But we know that at times following you has meant trouble. And Father, I want to pray for anybody in this room who is wondering, is it worth it? And I pray that right now you would reveal in the deepest parts of their hearts that Jesus is worth it. He's worth the final exams. He's worth the financial difficulty. He's worth the separation. He's worth the spiritual battle. He's worth the sleepless nights. He's worth everything. And plant that so deeply in all our hearts, Father, that we are inflamed with a passion to tell the world of this one who is worth it all. For it's in His name and for His sake that we pray. Amen.